Hello, listeners. This is Ryan. It is approximately 2 a.m. the morning of release of this episode. I just wanted to take a minute to talk to you here at the beginning. This is our first attempt at having one of our guests call in via Discord rather than having them here live in the studio with us like we have done with our previous guests. And it didn't go well from a technical perspective. There were lots of sound issues. I have been up very late, feverishly trying to make this palatable to your ears. Unfortunately, I don't think the finished product is quite up to our normal standard, but it's about as good as I could do with my current skill level. So I just wanted to, give you a little bit of warning. Some parts of this may get a little loud or staticky, and the sound levels are nowhere near even. However, we did determine what the issue was, and we do know how to do this for future episodes where we have guests calling in over Discord and such. So just apologies. I do hope that you enjoy the episode anyway. My intern is here with me, Sheldon. He says hello. But thank you very much for listening. We really appreciate it. And there will be improved sound coming on future episodes. We are actually going to be investing a little bit of money into some new equipment. So thank you very much for your continued listenership. Enjoy the episode and stay scary.
Spoiler warning for Stephen King's It. Trigger warning for dead pets, abuse, death of a child and sexualization of children. Please like, share and subscribe this terrible show. You can find the podcast on Twitter at HorrorPod69. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Slasher and Goodreads. Become part of the Disturbed community by asking for the Facebook group and Discord links. Send dick pics to the Horror of Babylon podcast at gmail.com. Support the show at patreon.com/the Horror of Babylon. You probably won't regret giving us money.
Welcome to the Horror of Babylon, where we are discussing Part 4 of Stephen King's It. I'm Ryan, and with me as always is Daniel. Say hi, Daniel.
Hi, Daniel.
And tonight we have a very special guest host. Everybody say hello to Carey, and Carey, say hello to everybody.
Hello.
So, as we like to do when we have a new person on the show, we like to get a little bit about their horror background, their likes and dislikes, and so forth. So, Carey, if you could take it away, tell us a little bit about what you like about horror, what you don't like about horror, how you got into it, anything you want to add.
Okay, well, hi. Like you said, my name's Carey, and the parts of horror that I really enjoy the most are probably, like, body horror type stuff. Like, if I'm not too into slashers or anything like that, like, thrillers don't really get me, but if it's actual, like, fantasy scary or any kind of a monster, I'm there 100%. The world is going to make fun of me for this, but I have always answered the what's your favorite scary movie with the exact same answer, and I will not change it, and I refuse to, but it's Silent Hill.
I thought she was going to say scary movie.
No, it's Silent Hill.
No, that's fine.
I never played the game, so I kind of just based, the movie was the first exposure that I ever had to Silent Hill, and I loved it, and I'm probably seeing it through, like, rose-colored nostalgia glasses, but I don't care. I still love it. I like Jeepers Creepers, too, but that one gets me laughed at just as much. So, my mom got me into horror a lot when I was younger. She is like a huge Stephen King fan. She took a vacation just to go visit his house because she's a creep.
That's on our bucket list.
Yeah, it is on our bucket list.
She still has a picture printed out to this day, probably 30 years later, of Stephen King's house, and it's like tucked in like baby pictures of Carey. It's like, oh, what's that? Oh, it's Stephen King's house. Next picture.
We literally talked like 2 or 3 episodes ago about the two of us going up and doing that. So I guess we're creeps too.
I mean, if it's the same one, I don't know. He's probably
Just wait until you hear Carey's opinion on people keeping teeth.
Listen, we cannot start that right now. It's awful. It's why do you keep your kids' teeth? Why?
I don't. I threw them all away.
Thank you. Because I was literally like 3 months ago when I found out that people keep their kids' teeth, and it freaks me out. I can't do it. Why?
You plant them. That's how you get your new kid.
Daniel's like, oh, I bet your parents kept your teeth. You're going to call them in the morning. And I called my mom in the morning, and I was like, Jennifer, did you keep any of my baby teeth? And her exact words were, and I quote, no, why the fuck would I do that? That's weird.
Literally every other person we talked to at work kept their kids' teeth.
Yeah, most people, I didn't want to keep them, and our parents were like, oh, you should keep them. And like, do what with them? Pull them out and look at them?
You put them in little charm necklaces.
No, like...
They're like, it's so you can have some of your kids' DNA when they go missing. I'm like...
What?
My kids' DNA is all over my house. I don't need to keep their teeth.
Carey, why don't you talk about some of that, the makeup that you do?
Oh, I do special effects makeup just for fun. Mostly I do horror stuff because, like I said, I really like, the body horror stuff I've done. I'm a big fan of clowns. I think it's hilarious that clowns are supposed to, like, be this thing of happiness and everyone finds them super creepy. So I like to do, clowns with giant teeth and just bullet holes in places you would never expect. I did one where my eyeball was hanging out of my head, and it's still probably one of my favorites to this day. But
she did my Joker makeup for the Joker movie.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. If you have like any socials you want to plug, like a Twitter or an Instagram or anything where you do your makeup, go right ahead.
She refuses to do it. I keep trying to tell her to.
Okay, well that's fine.
I don't use the internet.
The internet is overrated. I'm not gonna...
I play an MMO that takes up 98% of my time.
Is it Final Fantasy 14?
Yes.
Yes, it's Final Fantasy 14.
Okay. All right, so what about it? What's your background with it? Have you read it before? Have you read it once, multiple times? When did you read it? What did you think?
I have read it multiple times, but the last time was... How long ago was it, Daniel?
That would be...
Like 2 years.
Carey, you were reading it when I started.
Oh, just kidding. It's been more than 2 years.
It's been 5. It's going on 6.
My mom gave me... Books are my dragon hoard. So I own, like, an ungodly amount of books, and my mom gave me a lot of her old Stephen King books, and I had never read it before, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to do this. And at the time, because I work healthcare, I was sitting with a patient, and it was just me and him in his room all night, and he would be asleep because it's, the middle of the night. So I would just read it to keep myself awake, and sometimes put it down because I couldn't take it anymore.
That's how we became friends.
Okay. I wasn't going to bring this up, but then both of you... So, I detest the show Friends.
Yeah.
But my partner and my daughter have been watching it recently, so I catch bits and pieces just here and there as I'm going in and out of the room and such. And I walk in today, and they're talking about The Shining, the book.
Yeah. And
they're actually holding like a copy of the book, and apparently one of the characters is reading The Shining, and whenever it gets too scary, he puts the book in the freezer to keep himself from reading.
Oh, is it The Shining? I thought it was Cujo. Because Rachel made Joey read Joey made Rachel read this Stephen King book, and she made him read Little Women.
Yeah, it was The Shining.
Yeah, they watched Cujo in a separate episode.
Okay.
What's wrong with that dog?
A lot of things are wrong with that dog. Okay, so let's go ahead and move into our first segment, structure and themes. Daniel, on our first episode, we discussed kind of the overall themes of the book. And then on subsequent episodes, we've been kind of discussing what themes are occurring in particular segments. Mm-hmm. So in regard to part 4, what would you say are any new themes or any important themes?
I don't know if there's a lot of new themes, and I've been, like, ever since I read your outline, I've been struggling with a way to word this. There are two that really pop up, and one of them is growing up, like somebody revealing something to you. We'll get to it, especially in the Eddie chapter. Yeah. But I call it, like, the Santa isn't real effect, where you explain, like, a reality of a situation to a kid. I don't know what you call that theming-wise.
Coming of age,
growing up. And then you also get, like, the adults are liars theme. And and again, I've been struggling with what you word that, and it's like the complexities of adulthood. Again, this really comes in on the Eddie chapter, especially with his mother, and, like, her complex Munchausen by proxy, inner workings of her mind. Those were the big two that I came up with.
Yeah, I think we're getting deep into the book where we're just seeing the themes we've already discussed kind of bled out more.
Yeah.
Less so than we're seeing more new themes. Mm-hmm. I think one of the ones that jumps out to me is Derry itself, and the theme that the city and the people who live there are kind of past the point of no return, not helping each other. And I think we see that best in our Eddie chapter, where
a lot of them are coming in the Eddie chapter.
Yeah. I think in terms of, like, writing, it's probably the best chapter in this section.
Yeah, I have a lot to say on it.
But the part where he gets jumped by the bullies and the guy who owns the supermarket runs out to defend him, and Henry just pushes him.
Yeah.
And the guy's like, I'm done. I'm not.
Yeah, I can't fight this 6-foot child.
I've already done more than any other adult in this town would have done for this kid. I'm done. You guys can have him.
And again, I don't know what you would call that as a theme. I'm sure there's a word for it, but, like, a poisoned area.
Yeah. Corruption.
Yeah.
Like the corruption of a small town by an evil entity.
I know a word for it. Systemic.
Yeah.
It's buried deep into the core workings of the town. There you go. I went to college. I know words.
Okay, so Carey, you've read this book multiple times before. You said when somebody says it to you, what themes just jump out in your head in regards to the novel as a whole?
I think it's definitely, like, the growing up part that really gets me. There's a quote from it that actually I really enjoy, and I can't remember if it's in the beginning of the book or the end of the book. It might be spoilers, don't know. But it's about if there's an entire town of adults that, like, imagine a vampire, someone's going to imagine the stake that's going to kill it, but it will probably be a child because it's a simple thing. It's just a piece of wood. But it's the imagination of a child that turns it into something else. And I like that a lot of the stuff revolving around the book itself has to do with, you know, being a child and during your childhood and being a child dealing with adult problems, but also just dealing with being a kid and getting the shit scared out of you 24/7.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree. I concur. Do you concur?
I also concur.
We both concur. We've talked a lot about coming of age themes. We've talked about bullying is a big one.
The racism theme comes in a lot in this chapter.
We probably discuss it more than other people would, but we like to live dangerously. Friendship, fear, those are big ones that we've talked a lot about.
Imagination itself.
Yeah, that's another one as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into characters, because this is always our longest section. This is where the meat of our discussion is going to be. If this is your first time joining us on our It coverage, we discuss characters by going through the chapters in the section and kind of starting on the big characters from that chapter. Also, if this is your first time, stop, pause this, go back to the first episode where we discussed part 1. Listen to that first. But anyway, so first chapter we have here is chapter 13, the Apocalyptic Rock Fight, which is a huge, iconic chapter from the book. This is one of the things that sticks out for me. We're going to start by talking about the bullies, and of course we're going to start by talking about Henry Bowers. Daniel, why don't you go ahead and kick us off? What are your thoughts on Henry in this chapter?
I think it's really funny that after all the crazy, over-the-top bully shit that he did in this book, the thing that I find the most realistic is that he tricks his friends to come over to help him get chores done so that his crazy-ass father will leave him alone. Like, that's the thing that sticks out the most to me. It's not the racism, it's not the carving out his initials into somebody's belly. It's that, I'm gonna trick my friends into coming over so that I can get these goddamn chores done so I can go play with fireworks.
So, I think it was in the second episode that you pointed out that some people criticized the book by saying the bullies are cartoonishly evil.
Yeah, and this is the most realistic thing that I found in this book.
I think it's really Henry's home life that humanizes him and also makes him as, I don't want to say he's sympathetic, but he's as sympathetic as he can be.
Yeah.
Because of his dad. And we are going to talk about Butch Bowers later.
You don't have to, I think that I use this term a lot. It explains him. It doesn't excuse him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, if you grew up with Butch Bowers as your father, you would be fucked up and you would lash out at people weaker than you too.
People keep telling me about their childhoods, and every time they do, I realize that I might have actually been privileged because I had really great parents. Like every time it comes up, people are like, "Oh yeah, my father beat me," or "I was abandoned by my mother," and I'm just sitting there like, I was watching TV with my mother today, and me and my dad do kung fu every Tuesday.
Yes, your parents are great. Carey, do you have any general thoughts on Henry?
I mean, when Daniel said something about people saying that he was cartoonishly evil, yeah, some of the stuff that he does is ridiculous. At this point in now times, if a kid carved his initials into another kid, that kid would probably be locked up for a little while, in a nice little puffy jacket. But
he'd probably be locked up where we work, Carey.
Yeah, I forget the actual years that this took place.
1950.
I don't think that would have been
So, the sections where they're kids, the majority of it takes place summer of 1958.
Okay, 58.
Yeah, that. Granted, I was not alive in 1958, but I feel back then it was very oh, just give him one good punch and he'll leave you alone, or you can't act like you're afraid of him and just put your chin up, boy. You know what I mean?
I love your man impression.
I don't think that it would have been such a big of a deal as it is today. Not that carving your initials into another person is not a huge deal, but just rub some dirt in it and you'll be fine is probably what I'm going with here.
No, I agree with you. We had an incident when I was in elementary school where a bully brought a knife to school and threatened another student with it. They didn't carve their initials into another student, but they did pin them against a wall and put the knife to their throat. And it was very much like that. They were suspended for 2 days and then they were back, and it was kind of just glossed over, and all the parents were just yeah. And that was early 90s, so 40 years earlier, hard to say, how it would have been treated, especially considering, like we were talking about earlier, this is a town where the adults don't give a shit like they do in other towns.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The area's poisoned.
And that's even if the kid would have said anything about. Because it's not exactly like you come home and you're like, oh, how was school today, Jimmy? Oh, you know, I got the shit beat out of me.
Well, how's the other kid look?
Yeah. So, yeah. But Henry Bowers is like, I almost like that. It's not, like, excusable, like Daniel said, what did you say, it explains him, it doesn't excuse him?
Yeah.
Because, like, sometimes you just don't want to feel bad for the bad guy.
So, just a little on Butch Bowers was a World War II veteran and came back. They basically, King describes him as he is literally crazy. He lost his mind in the war, and he treats everybody around him very badly. He's abusive. He particularly hates the Hanlons.
Yeah.
To the point where he murdered all of the Hanlon's chickens.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So without getting into every one of his transgressions, he's, a grown-up version of Henry, and he
sits with a Japanese sword across his lap
while he's drinking.
He's a weeaboo.
It also mentions that he's not against beating Henry's friends, so he will abuse children other than his.
Yeah, he'll beat someone else's kids.
And they always steer clear of him whenever he has his katana out.
Yeah.
Because they believe someday he will use it on somebody.
To defend Milady's honor.
Right. And
Jesus Christ.
This character is explained by war trauma. That doesn't excuse it. Just because you're a veteran and you went through some terrible things in war doesn't mean you're allowed to beat the shit out of your kid. But, like you said, it explains, it doesn't excuse.
Yeah, should we talk about Henry and the dog?
Yeah, go ahead.
Henry systematically earned the trust of Mike's dog.
Mr. Chips.
Mr. Chips, who I was calling Mr. Pickles earlier.
It's close.
It was pretty close.
Just, maybe that's his first name.
Mr. Pickle Chips. Our favorite chip.
I could go for some pickle chips.
I have pickled peanuts. You want some?
Yes. He earns this dog's trust by bringing him food just so he can poison him later. And the whole time he's referring to this dog in the most H.P. Lovecraftian way.
N-word dog.
It just... And to the point where the dog just thinks it's another one of his names.
Right, because,
dogs don't know racial slurs.
Animals know tone. They don't know words. Which is why, generally, they can learn their names. But generally, if you yell at an animal and call it something other than its name, but use the same tone, a lot of the time they'll come anyways. But
exactly.
Particularly dogs.
And he ties the dog up and watches it slowly die from poison. He takes the opposite of the Dean Koontz approach.
That's showing that he's a whole nother level of crazy too, because you hear about, you don't hear about, but kids killing animals and being like, oh, well, that's the first step to being a psychopath is killing animals, but killing an animal is different than Komodo dragoning an animal.
Yeah.
It's also, he's not, when you hear these kinds of stories about kids or adolescents torturing and killing animals, generally it's being presented as, oh, they're doing it because they want to watch the animal suffer. But in addition to that, Henry's actually specifically doing this to hurt Mike Hanlon. So it's more premeditated than that.
And what does Butch do? Give him a beer.
Yeah, he gives him
he gives him his first beer to congratulate him. That's the father-son relationship here.
So, jumping into some of the other bullies, like you said, the chapter kind of starts with Henry getting all of his friends over to help do the chores so they can go over to the dump and set off some fireworks. Of course, we've got Belch Huckins and Victor Chris, who are the normal bullies that go with Henry throughout the book.
I couldn't even remember the other one's names.
Moose Sadler, who's the high school kid who's not very smart. And I don't remember the other guy, but he's...
the one who runs away.
He's only present in this chapter. But the one I want to talk about here is Victor Chris. because you get a lot of his perspective in this chapter. And throughout the book, you don't see a lot of Victor and Belch like resisting Henry. Prior to this, the only time where they ever like question him is when he's about to carve his initials in Ben, and they both say, you're not actually going to do it, are you, Henry? Other than that, they're kind of on board with everything. But when as they're going to the dump, they find Mike. They chase Mike to the dump, and Henry says that he wants to put an M80 down Mike's pants. And then we get Victor Chris's perspective, where he's like actually thinking about like abandoning ship, like Henry's about to cross the line.
Something bad, really bad's going to happen.
Yeah, like Henry's going to cross that line that I'm not willing to cross. But then when we get to the rock fight, when the losers start chucking rocks at the bullies and the bullies start throwing back, King singles out Victor Chris by saying that he's the bully who does the most damage to the losers because he's the least emotionally involved. Mm-hmm. He's the most cognizant of what's going on. And you also get a little bit of inner dialogue from him where he's saying, like, you know, Henry's about to cross the line. I'm going to be ready to bail at this any time because I'm not going to jail for Henry. But my friends are in this rock fight. I'm in this rock fight, so I'm going to be in this rock fight.
Is Victor the one that mentions he has a job later, or was that Butch?
That was Belch.
Belch, okay.
Belch, yeah. At the dump scene in a later chapter.
Okay. It's hard for me to keep them straight.
Yeah. The Belch is the larger, slower, stupider one. He's the one who...
is he the one who hit the baseball in the previous part? Okay.
Yeah, he's the one who hit the baseball and knocked the stuffing out of it like in the Sandlot.
All right. I'm there now.
Yeah, and then Victor's like the smaller, faster, smarter one. Who is more critical of Henry, but still goes along with everything basically. Do you have any either of you have any other thoughts on the bullies other than Henry?
I like that they gave like one rich coward just for this chapter, because I don't know if you guys ever had bullies or you knew a bully group, but there's always that one bully who kind of didn't fit in for me. Who's like a little bit more well off, who just looks like he fits in the rest of the #bully group. I thought that was funny.
I also think it's hilarious that, I mean, granted, the rock fight I think is like a big turning point because that's kind of where they start fighting back against the bullies. Because before this point, like, if my memory is serving me correctly, they didn't really do much to like get back at the bullies. But I just think it's hilarious, like, you've got a kid slicing other kids up, but the rock fight, man, that's really when it like, my friends and I used to throw rocks at each other when we were bored, like.
So there's a couple points in the book where they fight back, like when Ben is about to be cut up and he hits Henry and he goes flying backwards down the hill. Then Henry chases him down and Ben kicks him in the nuts. Or there's the fight where they fight behind the movie theater. Mm-hmm. But this is like the stand. This is where they make their stand. This is where they say, enough is enough. This shit is over. We're not fucking around with you anymore, Bowers.
Like a unified front, kind of. Presenting a unified front.
But that's important. There's a reason why it happens here. Daniel, why does it happen here specifically?
Because they're chasing down Mike. And like you said before, Victor's like, well, we're not really gonna like shove like the big firecracker up his ass, are we, or whatever he says, because he has some what are they, cherry bombs?
Yeah.
That could like really do real damage to a kid, and he's like, well, we're just gonna like throw some M80s at his feet, make him dance, but he can tell like Butch that it's bullshit, and you know he beats the crap out of Mike in this previous encounter, but this time Mike sees him before they can get a hold of him. Mike runs away, and you know, Henry just really wants to hurt him, tell him that he killed his dog, whatever he can get away with. And by the time that Mike reaches the rest of the losers, Henry's all like, you just give me that racial slur there, and the rest of you can go. And they're like, no, fam, we're not going to do that.
And also, just like, this is where they become 7.
Yeah.
They're able to make their stand against Henry and the bullies when it's all 7, and when the circle closes.
Yeah.
And the other bully is Peter Gordon.
Peter Gordon. That even sounds like a rich kid name.
Yeah.
It really is.
And then just commenting on what you said earlier about bullies, I didn't have that personal experience, but I went to a very small school in a very rural area where it was mostly low income. I can definitely see that stereotype existing at larger schools, but that wasn't really my experience as a kid. I definitely had a couple bullies. But one of my bullies in 5th grade made the mistake of telling everybody that he named his penis Wilbur. So everybody else in the school then began to bully him and call him Wilbur for until we graduated high school.
That's pretty funny.
Oh no.
One of my bullies OD'd, so who won in the end?
Oh, yeah, no, actually one of mine did too. Like in middle school, there was a kid that bullied me in gym class pretty badly, and a couple of years ago he OD'd in a sheets and died like on the floor of the sheets.
See, so who won in the end? We did.
Well, I wouldn't take such a dark approach to that, but yeah, I see what you're saying. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to chapter 14, the album. This is where Mike brings his father's photo album with all the historic pictures from Derry down to the Barrens to share it with the gang, and they kind of collectively have their first experience with Pennywise. Prior to this, everybody had their own solo experience, or I think it's only Bill and Richie who meet Pennywise together prior to this.
Yeah, when they had the other album out, the when they went to the house on Nebo. And yeah, the first encounter with the Wolfman.
Yeah, so this is all 7 of them having an experience together. Before we get into that, Carey, what are some of your favorite Pennywise encounters from the first parts of the book?
How early was the bird? Because the bird freaked me out.
Yeah, that was part 2. That was pretty early.
Yeah, the bird freaked me out, but I'm also just scared of regular birds. So that one freaked me out. But the one that really got me was when, I think it was Patrick, they would talk about Patrick having the fridge out in the middle of the woods, like someone had dumped a fridge, and he would take kidnap people's pets and take them out there and watch them come back every day and watch them slowly die.
Yeah.
Which is some messed up shit in the first place. But then when Pennywise got Patrick, it was the weird flying leeches.
Yep.
That just sucked the blood out of him.
Yep.
And that was one of the parts that I read while I was at work, while I was sitting at the hospital in a perfectly silent, dark room. And after that part, I just had to close the book, and I was like, I'm done with this one for a little while. And take a nice little break.
Put it in the freezer.
Yeah, put it in the freezer. That shit freaked me out. I don't know why. Like I said earlier, I genuinely enjoy body horror stuff because I like it because it freaks me out. And that one got me. That one got me hard.
It's bad.
Small tangent. I was reading The Stand in the middle of a COVID unit sitting with a patient wearing full protective gear right when the pandemic breaks out. So it seems we just read horror novels when we're sitting with patients.
Maybe that's how we should do a face reveal to our listeners, is share that picture of you, and because you sent me a picture of it.
Oh yeah, it should be somewhere in there.
Mm-hmm.
we went to break after that. Daniel was like, Carey, it's coming true. It's prophetic.
It's Captain Trips.
We're all gonna die.
Okay. So Daniel, what about this specific encounter with Pennywise with the album?
Well, it's the first time that they all see it together.
Mm-hmm.
Is this the chapter where they mention I can't remember who brings it up, but somebody says, I saw you saw the Wolfman because I saw the Wolfman.
Yeah.
So now we can all see it as the Wolfman.
Initially, they all only see what they're afraid of, but now Pennywise can use each other's fears against them.
Yeah, was that this chapter?
Yeah, I believe it was.
Okay.
Because it's when Mike confesses his story about the bird. Oh, excuse me, the bird.
Mm-hmm.
And then they, Bill's like, who wants to tell? And they all tell their stories, and that leads into a bigger discussion about Pennywise. So, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's this chapter.
And then they all see him in the book, and it's a pretty iconic scene. It's one that they've adapted in several different little ways when they all, finally get to see it together.
Yeah.
And it dances out at them. And then it's just mocking them from a picture frame. That would freak me out.
The 1990 miniseries has, a very literal adaptation of this scene. And then It Chapter 1 does it very differently, where they do it with the reel-to-reel projector.
I wonder if Woe does it.
It's hard to say what Woe does and what Woe doesn't do. But yeah. Is there anything about Mike particularly? Most of this is from his perspective. Oh, you know what? What else happens in this chapter is we get Mike's second encounter with Pennywise, which I always forget about, where he's at the 4th of July parade, and he...
Oh, is it the statue? No.
No. So his school participates in the 4th of July parade. He's in the band. I think he plays the trombone.
Because he goes to a church school.
Yeah, he goes to the church school. He's playing the trombone, and he sees Pennywise handing out balloons to kids on the parade route multiple times.
I literally just read this chapter, finished it up a week ago.
I forget about it
and
every time.
I already forgot about it.
Yeah. I think it's... I wouldn't say it's forgettable because it's not good, but it's one of those things that just never occurs to me.
I think it's just sandwiched between too much that's going on.
Yeah, but in the moment, that part is pretty freaky.
Yeah.
Have you had that experience where, and either of you, have you had that experience where you think you see somebody, you recognize somebody, you see either face, and then you're going on with your day, and then you think you see the same person again, but you're not sure?
Literally all the time.
Yeah, I've had that before.
Yeah. Usually I think I see someone out of the corner of my eye, and I turn around and there's no one there.
Fuck that.
The worst.
Carey, what are just some of your thoughts on Mike in general?
Try and bring up the remembering part.
You're good.
Yeah, I couldn't relate to Mike too hard because I am, not black, but so I don't really remember his parts all that well. I can relate to Ben because I've always been a fat kid, and I can relate to Bev because, she's the girl hanging out with all the guys, and I can kind of remember the rest of them, but I could never relate to Mike that much, so I just don't remember his parts all that much.
So
does that make me sound racist?
No.
Okay.
So I do, but not in terms of anything to do with the race. So when I was a kid, the character I related to most was Ben.
Oh yeah.
I was
Same.
I was kind of the chunky loner kid, and I also got crushes on girls super fast, super easy, super hard. So I really related to Ben as a kid. As I've read this book a couple times as an adult, I am relating a lot to Mike, actually. And that's because when they all grow up and they all leave Derry, Mike's the one who stays behind and kind of makes the sacrifice of staying in town. It makes the sacrifice of continuing to remember about Pennywise when everybody else gets to forget. And as an adult, and this is something that just goes with being a parent, is you tend to empathize more with characters who make sacrifices for other people. Any parent makes sacrifices for their kids. No, I have not made any sacrifices related to a killer clown. It's all about...
That you've confessed about.
That I've confessed about, but it's still relatable, even if his deeds are much greater tin my deeds. Burp-a-derp. Slurpy-nerp. Do you want me to put it in my mouth, Henry?
We're not there yet.
We're not there yet. Okay.
This is probably the chapter that did remind me the most of you, just because he's getting all historical and stuff.
Yeah, and that's like I'm a big history person. I have a bachelor's in history, and he learns about history from his dad, which is where I got my interest in history. My dad always had the History Channel on.
I could see you pulling out like an album to prove a point.
Actually, if you look at photos from the Dairy Fair in 1963, you will see that the schedule of events was thus.
In your eidetic memory.
I do not have an eidetic memory. I wish I did. Or do I? I don't know.
If you don't, it's very, very close. Your memory is very good.
It's not as good as it used to be. But yeah, it's...
I can only remember conversations about nonsense verbatim. If it had any kind of depth, I don't remember it.
Alright.
I have the worst memory.
Is it as bad as Daniel's?
Oh, probably worse.
That's bad.
Yeah.
That's bad.
Yeah.
I get goldfish brain a lot, but she hates it whenever I bring up specific instances.
Alright, so let's go ahead and jump into Chapter 15, The Smoke Hole, where the losers do their smoke inhalation ceremony to kind of prepare themselves for a confrontation with it, or / get guidance for their confrontation with Pennywise. And this is mostly from Richie's perspective. Quick summary: they've dug out this underground clubhouse. Ben has read about the ceremony that Plains Indians do to prepare for war. So they find the correct kind of wood and weeds. They go into their clubhouse. They set it on fire. They get it nice and smoky, and they stay down there like it's some kind of adolescent sauna. And
was the ritual of Chewed mentioned here, or was that mentioned earlier?
They've said in one of the interludes, Mike says "chud."
Okay.
With like no explanation.
I know in this part somewhere they talk about like the tongues being pierced together and telling jokes, but I can't remember if it was here.
I think actually that's in one of the current timeline sections.
Okay.
You know where it is? It's in the library where they find Stan's head. And
okay, I'm there.
Pennywise comes out and he tells them that they will not be successful with the ritual of Chud again. But that has to do with... We're not going to get into any more of that because that's all part 5.
Yeah.
But
I just know that they bring up like a lot of Indian rituals in this book.
Right. So they're doing their Indian ritual and everybody ends up bailing out except for Richie and Mike, and they end up having a vision of the origin of Pennywise. Daniel, tell us about that.
Well, they end up back in time, quite literally.
They are in a go.
Yeah, they're in a go, and they both sort of realize that even if their friends were to go down back into the smoke, and I think they even mentioned that they went down there at some point, and they weren't there. They're very literally a go.
Bill and Ben go back to pull Richie and Mike out, and they're not there.
Yeah. So this is part of that like fantastical space, the reality warping aspects. I honestly feel that when some of the I don't agree with some of the criticisms, but I feel that the common criticism you hear about this book, a lot of them start in this part, and particularly this point forward, where you get like these people are literally disappearing. You see Pennywise is falling from the sky. Okay, well, he's an alien, but not really. But more on that later.
I don't have any issues, but my nerd background is primarily fantasy and sci-fi, but a lot of fantasy, and so I've always had a real easy time with the suspension of disbelief and also accepting rules or the lack of rules that are in a story that wouldn't apply to our world. Like in Spirited Away, when Chihiro's body is disappearing and Haku says, "You have to eat something from this world or you'll disappear." And the audience is just like, okay. and then she eats food from this world and she doesn't disappear. I'm like, okay, all right, keep going. So I don't have any issues with what's going on, but I can definitely see where somebody who's maybe a little more grounded in reality than I am.
I've heard criticisms where people feel like this book is him throwing stuff at the wall, like any crazy idea he had, he put in this book. I think it flows together. Because even in this chapter, they sort of mention it's falling from the sky, but it didn't really come from space. It came from beyond space. That's getting into like the trans-dimensional aspects of the creature.
So, without getting too much into spoiler stuff for part 5, but yeah, everything you said is right. And it also goes back to something that we've mentioned a couple times as we're discussing this book, is that some of this stuff makes a lot more sense when you've read this book 2-3 times, but
because you start catching all of the little hints.
But some of those criticisms that other people make more sense if you know that they've only read it one time.
Yeah, it's your first time reading it. Maybe even you're a more casual reader. And like me rereading this book now, the clown's in it way more than I remembered it being.
Yeah,
I remembered its shape-shifting way more than I remembered the clown. And it turns out the clown was in it a heck of a lot.
Yeah, he usually goes from the clown to whatever monster, or from the monster to the clown.
And if he's a different monster, there's like puffballs on him.
Or he's wearing the silver suit.
But sometimes you don't remember that on your first read.
Yeah. Carey, do you have any thoughts on what we're talking about?
I mean, it is like a book about a giant shape-shifting clown, so I mean, I guess I can kind of see where people are coming from for criticizing it for going a little too into it, but I, on the other hand, can see where, like, it's a book about a giant shape-shifting clown, you know, there's got to be something there. It's not like he was just a guy who someday decided or figured out that he could shapeshift. Like, you kind of had to be expecting a little bit that
I 100%
something else.
Believed that they were going to do that for the remake, that it was literally just a dude who decided to start shapeshifting.
Yeah, well,
based off of a single trailer. It turned out not to be the case, but
we'll talk about that when we get to that episode.
Yeah.
What about Richie in this chapter? And
love him.
Talk to me about that.
Talk
to me about Richie Tozier.
Especially like when he starts to note one of my favorite points in this book is when he's like looking at Bill and he's like, he doesn't realize he doesn't always stutter.
Yeah.
And it's like just a passing thought. It's probably my favorite line in the book, and it's such a small one, but it's just one kid having insight into another kid when he sees that he's not always having these little hang-ups.
So something that the first time I read this, I had seen the miniseries many times, so going into it, I didn't really identify Bill and Richie's relationship as being one of the important ones. I always thought about, based on seeing the miniseries so many times, I thought about Ben and Bev. I thought about Bill and Eddie. I thought about Richie and Stan. But as you read this book a couple times, Bill and Richie's relationship is really one of the most important ones in the Losers Club.
They're super tight. Richie's the first one that Bill takes back to show the album, to show this is something that happened, and Richie goes along with it.
Yep.
He sees it. They go to the house together.
Even though Richie is in so much denial about his own experience with Pennywise that he's convinced himself that it was a dream.
Yeah.
But he still readily accept what Bill's saying.
And this is one of those instances where he stops doing his voices and he just goes to the ghost, sees what's going on.
That's fucked up.
Yeah. I do love his impressions and how they get progressively more out there. He did the British butler a lot in this chapter. It reminded me of Luann's Little Penguin.
Yeah, the Manger Babies.
Yeah. What? Because he says that a lot in this book, and all I could picture was Richie walking around with a little penguin.
Uncle Hank, at Sunday school I'm going to do the Manger Babies, and I need you to be God.
Alright, be careful. You're gonna end up getting Luann banned from your house.
Carey, what do you think about Richie?
I identify with Richie a little bit more because I've always kind of been like the class clown, but that it kind of extends from like growing up the fat kid, because you're like, oh, okay, well, if I'm funny, people will like me. So I identify with him a little bit more, and I definitely see where you're coming from. That in the book, there are friendships within the seven of them. Granted, the seven of them are all pretty tight, but there are friendships within the seven of them, and you don't really get to see that one as much in any of these adaptations as you do the book, because they're pretty tight in the book.
Yeah, and that...
So
Would you say they're tight like a turtle?
I would not. That would be you. You would say that.
Alright. We'll bring up Bill and Richie again when we get to part 5, our last episode, because, spoiler alert, that's going to be important. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into Chapter 16, Eddie's Bad Break. This, I think, is, if you're ranking just like the chapters themselves, just like based on writing and the actual story, or like the arc of the particular losers, I think this chapter ranks very highly throughout the book as a whole.
I think it's one of the stronger ones.
Before we talk about what specifically happens in this chapter, Daniel and I have shared our thoughts on Eddie throughout the episodes where we're discussing this book. Carey, what do you think about Eddie?
Alright, this is gonna be pitiful. He's the one that has, like, the crazy Munchausen's mom, correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
It's a gazebo.
Shut up.
It's a gazebo. Yeah, that was the funniest part of that whole last movie. But, like I talked about earlier with, like, the kids having, like, yes, they have, like, a lot of childhood things, but they also deal with, like, some pretty grown-up problems. Like, his is not as bad as, like, Mike's or anything with the whole racism thing, but I imagine, like, having the stress of having a mom like that, you know, won't let you be your own person or do anything yourself is probably, like, because I tend to think, like, it's always the kids that have, you know, an abusive dad or, like, are extremely racism to act, or, you know, like, none of them have, like, a stellar home life, and I feel like that's probably one of the reasons why Pennywise targets them, if that makes sense. That's what I always thought. And that's probably a big hit, like, a big part of why he gets targeted, is because his mom is so overprotective and weird.
So,
am I making sense when I say things?
Yes, you are. The only pushback I would give it is Mike has, like, a very good home life. Richie's seems to be kind of normal. We don't get much information on Richie's. There's just...
I think if we had to rank them, Richie has the best home life right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Mike might have the best home life, but everything else around his home life sort of sucks.
Right,
Yeah.
but his relationship with his parents...
is stellar.
Yeah.
But he has to deal with all the racism stuff instead.
And that Stan, we basically get no information about his home life, but then Bill, Bev, Ben, and Eddie all have serious issues with their parents.
Ryan, we got plenty on Stan. His dad killed Christ.
And what's worse than that?
Stan said that, Carey, not me.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, exactly. That's who he murdered.
So, his middle initial is H, but what does the H stand for?
Hollowitz.
Hollowitz. Oh, because he is Jewish.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you think the first time Jesus brought a girl home and he had the girl up in his bedroom, his mom was like, Jesus! Do you want some punch and cookies for your little girlfriend?
I picture the Virgin Mary being a lot sexier than that, but I have issues.
Oh, this wasn't the Virgin Mary. This was like Brittany Bratt from down the street.
Yeah.
Nothing happened because of Mrs. Oh, you mean his mom, not okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. I get his girlfriend was Mary and his mom was Mary. I get them mixed up.
Yeah. Yeah, you always end up marrying your mother.
Yeah, but like, who gets with a woman who has the same name as your mom? I mean, you did?
Yeah.
But did you like say Anita?
No, I've always called every woman I've been with some variation of baby.
Yeah, I mean, like I couldn't do that. Like I could never like say my mother's name in the bedroom.
I think she was Baby Doll.
Yeah, like although your mom would actually work because there's like lots of puns like Anita that, Anita your pussy, Anita your ass.
Excuse me.
I did actually date a guy with my dad's name once. It was horrific.
Did he have the same handlebar mustache your dad has?
Dear God, no.
Does your dad have like a Hercule Poirot mustache?
My dad has a handlebar mustache and a Fu Manchu at the same time.
Wow.
He looks like Hulk Hogan.
That does not stop at his chin.
Wow.
And also a mullet.
Wow.
Yeah, it's great.
My dad looks like Joe Dirt and Hulk Hogan had a baby and it grew up to be Gandalf.
Wow.
Once a year, I
Gandalf the Grey?
Yeah.
Oh.
Once a year, I make a Facebook post to piss her dad off, and all it ever is Kiss is just ICP for boomers, and he gets so mad.
Well, I mean, like, in the day, Kiss was like an outrageous band.
Yeah, exactly. They drank Faygo.
I mean, they were like, it was like Kiss, and then it was like Gwar, and then now it's, well, not so much ICP, because I guess ICP isn't current.
Yeah, it's nothing now.
But, I mean, they were like shock rock. I mean, like, Alice Cooper was too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard for us to think of Alice Cooper and Kiss as, like, shock rock, but, you know, in the 70s they were. Like, it was outrageous to have somebody paint their face like that and have a super long tongue, and yeah, I mean...
Oh yeah, my grandmother was absolutely like, turn that devil music off, not in my good Christian household, and my dad was like, fuck you, Mom.
Yeah, and like, in this book, like, Bill's mom...
So many of them hate rock and roll.
Like Little Richard is like the most wholesome rock and roll you could get, but she thinks it's devil music.
I can't remember which artist it was, but Eddie even says, I hope this guy isn't black because my mom won't let me listen to him anymore.
I don't remember, but yeah.
I do remember that,
though. Where did we leave off on Eddie?
Okay, so we were talking about Eddie in general, but so let's get into the specifics. So Eddie, he's by himself. So this is post-rock fight. So the line between the losers and the bullies has been drawn. It's basically war at this point. And the worst case scenario happens where one of them gets cornered by the bullies alone. Eddie's coming out of the grocery store. I think he has like candy bars and a Pepsi, and he's ready to go home and have like a good afternoon. And he
runs into them after he runs away from the pharmacy.
So he goes from the pharmacy, then he goes to the grocery store. Yeah. So it starts at the pharmacy where he has his conversation with Mr. Keene, who pulls him back into his office and basically tries to tell him that his asthma medicine is a placebo.
Do you know what a placebo is, Eddie?
So let's start there. What about this conversation he has with Mr. Keene? What do you think of that?
I think that Mr. Keene is the best adult in this book, bar none.
It's funny because they mention multiple times that he's not a nice man.
You don't need to be a nice man in order to tell a kid what he needs to hear. In fact, I think that helps. Sometimes when you're nice, you avoid the topic that you need to talk about. And in this case, he's like, I've made a lot of money off of this kid, but this is bullshit. She's literally ruining this kid's life because she's just convinced he's sick. And now he's convinced he's sick. I'm going to give him a malt liquor in this... Or what did they have?
A milkshake?
Yeah.
An ice cream soda.
Yeah.
Not a malt liquor. I'm going to get this 11-year-old kid drunk.
He might have believed him then.
It's funny because it even says in the book that he doesn't charge them what he could. Like, he makes it cheap.
Yeah. He's like, I could charge them real medicine cost.
But he doesn't.
I mean, I think everybody kind of remembers, like, the first time when you found out, hey, my parents might not be right about everything.
Yeah.
And at first you're like, nah, you know. These people raised me my whole life. Like,
it's like I said about the Santa Claus thing. This is him telling him that Santa isn't real, only it's his medicine. It's what he needs to believe in.
It's a gazebo!
This is Eddie's equivalent to what happened to Stan earlier in the book, where when Stan encounters Pennywise, it kind of shatters his perspective, and because he believes in like logic and the natural order of the world, and it kind of offends him on like a primal level. And this is the same thing for Eddie, but you know, his medicine and his mom's hypochondria is just, it's such a structural part of his life.
His whole personality is nearly based around needing asthma medicine.
Yeah, like it's his crutch. Anything bad happens, that's what he goes to immediately.
Yeah. I can't imagine any other way other than having that horrible asthma.
So he goes from getting his world rocked. He goes to the grocery store. He gets some junk food to try and feel better. As he's leaving, he gets cornered by Henry, Belch, Victor, and Moose, and Patrick Hochstetter. And they chase him. They break his arm. He goes to the hospital. His friends try to come visit him. His mom sends them away. He has a vision of it while he's under, and that leads to his confrontation with his mom. Let's talk about that.
The confrontation is really weird, especially if you're only familiar with the adaptations. Because what ends up happening is he calls his mom on all of her bullshit, and then goes, "But you know, I think that pharmacist was really full of shit, wasn't he, Ma?" And he kind of tricks her into going along with him in exchange for continuing to believe this Munchausen nonsense.
He manipulates her because he has two issues. One, she's going to not let him see his friends. Two, she's going to continue with this asthma crap. And he decides that he's going to put the asthma medicine on the table. Okay, Mom, we'll continue to go along with that, but in exchange, I get to continue to see my friends.
And I can't remember exactly how the conversation unfolds, but I remember when I was listening to it this time, I'm like, this little shit is so clever. I love him.
Yeah, he definitely like maneuvers her conversationally into a position where she can't do anything about it.
You want to talk about some 4D chess moves? Eddie's sitting there like, I'm going to trick my Munchausen mom into continuing to be a Munchausen mom, but I get to see my friends.
Yeah, and even then, like, even if she still gets the prescription for the asthma medicine and he still carries it with him, if he doesn't use it like a crutch, like, then that hold over him is gone. Even if the inhaler's still there with him, it's up to him to actually use it and rely on it. It has nothing to do with her, sort of.
And then he continues to do it and then marries his mother.
Myra, the quote-unquote hog.
Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunate. So let's talk about this. So something, Carey, something that Daniel and I have brought up as we've covered multiple Stephen King books is, there are topics where he's not particularly sensitive.
Yeah.
And it comes up in this book with, overweight people and how he describes Eddie's wife, Eddie's mom, Ben Hanscom. It also comes up with people of color a lot.
He uses the N-word so much.
A lot.
So first, let me ask, how many King books have you read? Just it, or have you read other things?
I've read other things. I can't give you an exact number, but...
So...
I remember when we read The Stand, both of us were like, he used the N-word way more than we thought he was going to use the N-word.
Exactly. So, Carey, share some of your thoughts about, how... What are some of King's strengths and weaknesses when talking about these sort of things?
I mean, it's the conundrum of the timing again, like, because back in 50 whatever, that's how people talked, but he almost takes it to a whole nother level. Like, to me, in my 2022 brain, I'm like, he's being awful mean to this fat kid, because I was a fat kid. But I also remember, like, in the 90s, like, receiving, like, workout tapes for birthday presents, and, like, it was just a thing that, you know, people were just like, if someone describes me still to this day, they're a little bit, like, nicer about it now. They're like, oh, you know, she's, like, a little bit bigger, but some people are like, nah, she's fat. So I think it's just, like, a combination of, like, the timeline, and I think he's just probably one of those people that would, instead of saying, oh, well, she's a bigger person, he'd be like, no, she's fat. So, the last Stephen King book I read was Needful Things. It was pretty recent, and if I'm correct, I think Needful Things was one of the books that he wrote after it.
Yes.
Like, a lot after it.
It's
and that
early 90s, I think, and it was like 85, I think.
Oh, I thought it was a lot more recent than that, because I didn't see, you know...
I'll look it up.
In that book, it was the older generation still kind of spoke like that, but the younger generation wasn't really that way, particularly about, like, the race thing.
Needful Things came out in 1991, and it came out in 1985.
That's a lot closer than I thought they were.
But it is something that he becomes more sensitive on. Like, I've read Dr. Sleep, which came out in, like, early 2000s.
I read Dr. Sleep, too.
Yeah, and that's a lot more sensitive on topics like gender and race and sexuality and all of these sorts of things. Something you were saying, it reminded me of this movie that I watched recently with my partner. She likes to watch TV as she's going to sleep, and sometimes she'll just, like, put on a movie that I've never seen before, and she'll fall asleep in the first 5 minutes, and then I just sit there and
invested.
Yeah, I watch the whole damn movie, and often it's something that I would have no interest in. I would never put it on, but it was this new Netflix movie with Rebel Wilson called Senior Year. It's about a high school senior who goes into a coma in 2002 and wakes up in 2022 and goes back to high school, and she's talking with her friends, and she says something is retarded, and they're like, oh, no, you can't say that anymore, we don't use that word anymore. And she's like, well, what do you say then? Do you just, like, if you don't like something, do you just say it's super gay? And they're like, no, you can't say things are gay.
God.
That's pretty great.
Yeah.
That had a whole series of commercials starring Wanda Sykes about it. You can't just say that.
Yeah. Okay, so we should keep moving. So the next one is Chapter 17, One of the Missing, The Death of Patrick Hockstetter.
Oh, boy.
I think we're actually going to kind of tie this one into scary shit, because I think a lot of this is... Scary Shit is our section where we talk about what was scariest in the book, and I think these two are going to overlap. But just Patrick Hockstetter is the bully that Henry replaces Peter Gordon with, because Peter Gordon kind of abandons them at the rock fight.
No more rich kids.
And Patrick is fucking crazy. And Victor Criss kind of acknowledges that this shows how far gone Henry is going, because back in the day, Henry would never bring a crazy person like Patrick Hockstetter into their gang. But as the events of the summer progress and Henry gets more and more foregone, he's thinking about these things less and less.
He shows girls his box of dead flies.
And they don't like to sit in front of him in class because he'll touch their breasts, or he'll play
Snap
with their
bras.
Yeah, he'll play with their hair, which I wouldn't like that.
I would also not like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
So a little bit on Patrick, and also Carey. The first time I read this, there were like 5 different parts where I almost put this book down and didn't finish it. Mm-hmm. This chapter is one of those 5 sections. So we find out that Patrick Hockstetter is essentially a true sociopath, in that he sees himself as the only real
thing.
He's the only real being in the world.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
You were right when you were like, well, this is the part where you kind of see that Henry has absolutely lost his shit, because, like, in a way, up until this point, my thought was that, Pennywise is, like, directly working through Henry, and that's why he does all this crazy, like, super bad stuff. But then this kid comes in and I'm like, nah, maybe the whole town just fucked up. Like,
yeah, because as bad as
this kid might be worse.
As bad as Henry is, Patrick might be worse.
Yeah, 100%.
The first thing you learn about him, and this is the thing that really got me, where I like had to put the book down for a while, is that he suffocates his infant brother in the crib.
And he doesn't just do it, like, he, like, moves him around, suffocates him a little bit, He's like, oh, okay, this will work.
Yeah. And
nobody talks about it.
After that, he just goes on about his day like it's literally every other day, and all the adults think he's in shock, but he's not. He just doesn't give a shit.
Yeah. Because now his meals will be on time.
Yeah. But yeah, we were talking about Patrick Hockstetter. He's sociopath. Suffocated his little brother because, 1, he was experimenting and it was interesting, and 2, his meals were coming late.
And in the previous chapter, during Eddie's big break, he spits a very descriptive loogie right on his face.
Yeah. You don't have to eat all that right now. You can save some of it for later. And
other than a scene that we're not talking about just yet, I think this is the most sexed up chapter in the whole book.
Yeah, I have. I'm saving that particular scene for Kiss Me, Fat Boy.
Yeah.
Because I actually have, like,
a bunch of thoughts.
Yeah, I have a bunch of thoughts. That I almost, like, put this book down twice during this chapter. 1 with the baby, and then 2 with that. And then...
Yeah.
And then there's the refrigerator.
And then you have Bev hiding the whole time watching on them.
So scared for Beverly. Like, I was so scared. Like, Henry would have murdered her if he found her.
I had a joke that when we get to Kiss Me, Fat Boy, and you can edit it out if you want. But during this scene, like, something popped in my head about Beverly, so we'll get to it when we get there.
Okay.
Oh, God.
So, we're going to talk more about Patrick in Scary Shit and in Kiss Me, Fat Boy. So, in the interest of keeping moving, we'll just kind of stutter him there, and we're going to bring him back up in those 2 sections.
But we don't always stutter.
No, we don't, Bill. Okay, so let's go to Chapter 18, which is the Bullseye. Kind of has two halves. One is Ben, and the other is Bev. And what we didn't mention, the framing narrative for Part 4 is all of them as adults in the library sharing stories.
Yeah, going further back in time.
Yeah, they've come back from their walking tours.
And they're piecing more of it together.
Right. And Ben tells the first part of this chapter, where they all... and this is one of my favorite parts in the whole book, because you kind of get to see them as regular kids, where they all meet up at Bill's house one night when his parents are out, and they play Monopoly
while they're making
the silver slugs.
Yeah, that was great.
And not the funniest part in the whole book, but one of the funniest is Bill's parents get home, and Bill's mom is like, "Oh, who won Monopoly?" And Bill says, "Stan did. Jews are great with money." And she goes, "Bill!" And then they all just bust out laughing.
Jesus Christ.
Similarly, the same part is when his mom sees Beverly and goes, "Oh, that girl's developing. I guess we have to chaperone them now."
Yeah. But
oh no, the titties is coming in.
But unlike unlike a lot of the other adults, in Bill's mom's defense, she doesn't say, "Oh, girls shouldn't be hanging out with boys." Like, she doesn't judge Beverly for hanging out with a bunch of boys like other adults in this book do.
Yeah. It's just,
that happens a lot.
it's just, hey, we better watch them.
Yeah, which, I mean, they are on the verge of adolescence, so yeah. Okay, so the first half of it is that. Second half is their actual first time taking the offensive to Pennywise, going to the house on Neibolt Street to try and find where it lives. At this point, they haven't realized that he uses the pipes to travel, that he lives underground in the sewers. They think that that's kind of his domain. So they go there with the intention of using the silver slugs to kill him. So first, before we get into that second half, any other thoughts on the first half and the silver slugs and the Monopoly date?
I just like, and I think it was mentioned in like bits and pieces throughout this entire part of Beverly being the best shot, and it's continually insisted, no, it has to be you. You're the best shot. You're the one who's not going to miss. And then it comes down to almost like a fate-esque thing. Like it had to be her.
Yeah, something that we haven't brought up yet, which I'm surprised about, is that each of them has a role. It's almost sort of Star Trek-esque, where they each have like their landing party role or their...
I was going to say D&D, but that's still good.
That's
Yeah.
what I was gonna do.
But, okay, so Eddie is the navigator.
Mm-hmm.
Ben is the engineer. Bev is...
The sharpshooter, DPS.
well, I was going to say she's weapons controls.
Okay, yeah.
Because again, I'm coming at this from a Star Trek metaphor, but they all have like their special power that is in a way kind of fantastical because it's not explained. Like, why does Eddie always know how to go? Like, he navigates them in every situation. That part is better explained
when they get
in part 5.
Yeah.
But in part 2. In an earlier part of the book, it mentions that he can drive in Boston without directions, and he always goes the wrong way. He never takes a wrong turn. And you know that driving in Boston is very complicated.
It is chaotic.
Yeah.
I do not miss it.
Carey, what are your thoughts on any of their superpowers?
I like that it kind of helps tie in to, you know, I don't know if it's because of Pennywise being not necessarily like from this world or what have you. It's just like it's the same idea of like the childhood thing of if you're wearing a cape, you're kind of like indestructible.
It's why I wear capes to every Superman movie.
Yeah, like they each kind of have something different that they can fight back with, and it's not just like 7 kids taking on like this supernatural force. Like they all have a little bit of that with them too. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because I mean,
they even kind of mentioned that earlier. Like they were meant to find the smokehouse ritual. That there's guiding forces that they can't quite see, so they sort of have to roll with it as much as they hate rolling with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the abilities that they have are realistic but fantastical in a sense, because you never really... Like, Ben knows how to make that dam through intuition. He's never read a book on how to build a dam, but he knows how to do it.
It's I would call it like realism amplified.
Yeah.
It's like it's New Game Plus. They just don't realize they're on repeat yet.
It's Steve Rogers' super strength instead of Clark Kent's super strength.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so they go to the house on Neibolt Street. This is their first offensive against Pennywise. They go in through the window that goes into the basement, and they crawl down the pile of coal that Bill and Richie did when they went to Nebold Street to try and shoot the werewolf with Bill's dad's Ruger he got in the war.
Yeah. Ben gets stuck.
Yeah, Ben gets stuck. He's worried about
his pants coming off
and his ass being in Beverly's face. They have to manhandle Eddie down the window because his arm is in a cast.
Yeah. I like that even though he's in a cast, he shows up.
Yeah. And they make a point of saying that he's still in pain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They all take a shot of his aspirator before they go in, too.
Which is another thing I forget. Like, I attribute that more with the adaptations because I just remember that scene really well in the adaptations. But it's straight out of the book, and I always forget that.
They all take a shot of the placebo.
Yeah. Give me a mouthful of gazebo.
Yeah. That's what I say to my dates.
Jesus Christ.
Okay, so talk to me about their actual encounter with Pennywise that happens in the house.
Who, me or Carey?
You.
Oh, sorry. I didn't see where you were gesturing.
You're the one who just read this last week.
So they go into the house, and the house is doing everything in its power, or Pennywise is doing everything in its power to get them to waste a shot. It has a rat scurry by it. It's causing the walls to literally go up and down and shake.
Because they only have 2 slugs.
They only got 2 slugs. They got 2 shots at this. And the whole time they're going, if an adult was here, would they even see the walls closing in on them? And at one point, I think it was Bill has to convince Stan that it's fine, that it's not really happening, so he punches up. And I thought that was cool. I think that's another part that might confuse the casual readers and get them to go, he's throwing nonsense at the wall. I think this all flows together into this Lovecraftian-esque, reality-bending, god monstrosity sort of way.
This chapter confused me a little bit the first time I read it.
Yeah. And again, on a second reading,
it makes a lot more sense.
It makes a lot more sense. Eventually they get, I think it's to a bathroom.
Yeah.
And there's just an exploded toilet. It looks like someone dropped a grenade in it.
Well, it explodes because he comes out of it,
yeah.
Right?
Well, it was already exploded because that's what he came out the first time as the werewolf.
Right, but then he comes out of it again.
And at first it's kind of amorphous until it takes the shape of the werewolf.
Because they say that they can sense, as he's coming through the pipes, he's in his true form.
Mm-hmm.
And he's in his true form when he comes out, but none of them can comprehend what they're seeing.
And then one of them goes, the werewolf, and then it starts to werewolf eyes.
Yeah. Oh, gosh, what movie is it? It's Ghostbusters. Okay, so at the end of Ghostbusters, when What's-Her-Face takes a form, they're all like, don't think of anything.
Choose the form of the destroyer.
Yeah, choose the form of the destroyer. And they're like, make your minds blank. Don't think of anything. And then
Stay Puft Marshmallow.
I
thought of the most cuddly, softest thing I could.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what happens.
Only he thinks of a werewolf.
He thinks of a werewolf instead.
Because that's the last thing that they saw in the house. That's what they're expecting. And it also sort of plays into a werewolf is what they can kill with silver.
Yes.
And Bev misses the first shot because it's super chaotic.
But it bounces off a wall and Mike catches it, right?
Does he catch it?
I thought he did.
I don't think he catches it. I think she just has the second one because she hits him with the second one and then she bluffs even though she's out of ammo.
What I remember, and I could be wrong, is that she shoots... I thought she recovers one somehow and it had something to do with Mike, but I could be wrong.
I remember, again, I could also be wrong, that it gets embedded in the wall. Mm-hmm. She hits him with the second shot and it explodes his head.
Right.
And then everyone starts screaming, kill it, so she pulls back and it believes that it can actually die, so it retreats even though she's bluffing. There's nothing in the slug.
And at that point, we're in Ben's perspective, because he's actually looking around like, guys, that was her last shot. Like, why are you saying kill it? She doesn't have another shot. And then it clicks for him, mm-hmm. and then he starts yelling, kill it, kill it, kill it.
And then it runs away like a little bitch.
Well, I mean, if you were going to get murdered by 7 children, would you not run away?
I would also run away like a little bitch.
Yeah, I would run away like a little bitch too.
I would. This would have been my rock throwing fight. Only I would have murdered children.
So, Carey, you haven't reread this book recently. How much of this section do you remember clearly, or what do you remember from this section that sticks out to you?
Not much really, if we're being honest. I remember a lot about the house on Newbolt Street. I remember that, like, because I'm a sucker for, like, spooky abandoned places. I remember that, like, I remember seeing that house very clearly and plainly in my head, the way he was describing it, but I don't remember a lot of the things that happen inside of it at this point a lot.
I feel like when you haven't read it and it's been a year or two, this event kind of blends in to some of the things that happen in part 5.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to distinguish them when you haven't read it recently.
Yeah.
What my problem was before I recently read it was I was seeing a lot of the adaptation.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that makes sense. I saw the adaptation more recently.
In the new movies, they play up the house on Newbolt Street a lot more than they do in... Well, one, it's not in the 90s miniseries at all, but even more in the book almost.
Yeah. And we'll get to that more when we cover that movie, but...
Yeah.
But when I finally got back to reading this chapter, you know, I start to remember the differences and seeing the stuff that Stephen King in particular does.
Yeah.
And it comes down... There's like a huge running theme of like faith in this book.
Yes.
But it's not faith. It's not like church faith. It's like little kid faith. It's faith in the Tooth Fairy and faith in the silver kills the monster.
I'm going to stop you there because that's actually one of the questions I have for our Power of Christ Compels You section.
Alright.
So wrapping this up, just some on Pennywise. This is where they kind of figure out some of their Pennywise lore. This is when they realize that he travels through pipes.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of put 2 and 2 together, that he shows up near water sources, he appears out of drains.
It's even like when they go and like look for Patrick Hochstetter's body where it was dragged down.
Yeah, exactly. So that's where they kind of figure that out. Now, our last chapter here is the Fourth Interlude. We've talked a lot about these interludes throughout all of these episodes. I'm just going to kind of go out there and say I think this is the weakest.
I was going to say this is the worst one.
I don't think it's bad.
I think grading it on a curve, it would take 5th place.
Yeah, it's just the least memorable. Like, this is my 3rd time reading this book, and I'm always excited to get to the Black Spot chapter or the Bradley Gang chapter. Before I came here, I had to look up what it was because I had already forgotten. So, if you haven't read it recently, this is the interlude where Mike Hanlon tells about the incident where a logger murders a bunch of people in a bar.
Yeah.
And it's basically that.
I do not remember this part, like, almost at all. And, it's not just because, like, oh, well, it's just gone out of my mind, because I really did enjoy the entire, like, book, and I loved this book, but that part just did not stay with me in my brain hole.
No, and it doesn't for me either. I mean, the only reason I remember any of it is because I read it last week.
Yeah, and there's some interesting parts in it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for Mike, it's like how everything sort of ties together. The place was called the Silver Dollar.
Right, because this is essentially the last interlude. You get, like, a final interlude at the end, but this is the last one that kind of explores the history of Derry.
Yeah. I still prefer the last interlude, but we'll get to that when we...
Yeah. Go ahead.
They talk a lot about, like, unions and how corporations would, or, you know, logging companies. For us, it would have been coal barons. We're from West Virginia, so we hear a lot of union stories.
Yeah, and all to do with coal mining, whereas in Maine, it's all about logging.
And so, like, they killed the dude who was going on about unions.
Mm-hmm.
And then people get murdered in the bar, and then they do one of their last lynchings.
Yeah.
Of the dude who killed them in the bar, even though most people were, like, on board with it.
You know what's sad about this? The thing that sticks out to me most about this section, and that the thing that I do remember when it gets back to it, is just something that's super gross, is the description of this character visiting a brothel, and the prostitute that he's having sex with is so out of it that she says that she's an inch deep in semen that's on her sheets, and he says, "Oh, this is so gross," and she goes, "Oh, I can change the sheets for you if you want, and we can continue." It's just gross, and that's the thing that like sticks out to me most about this.
It's almost like running a train on someone's gross.
God.
Cutting that out.
Jesus Christ, kid.
I thought you were going to say the part where the guy gets the axe buried in his tummy.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, no, it's super descriptive.
None of this entire part stayed with me. I don't know why.
I mean, there's not a lot to it. The guy kills a bunch of people in a bar.
Yeah. It's less memorable for the town. It's less memorable for how it has affected characters recently.
Yeah.
That might be part of it, is it's too far back.
Yeah.
Is like,
it's the oldest one, I think.
The interlude before, like, there were still people living who were in that shootout.
Yeah, in the Bradley Gang one, it mentions Bill's dad, for goodness sakes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, this is the furthest removed. It's not bad, it's just forgettable.
Okay, so let's just go ahead and move on to scary shit. This is where we talk about what was scariest, what was most effective.
I'll kill you all! I'll drive you crazy, and I'll kill you all! I'm every nightmare you ever had. I am your worst dream come true. I'm everything you ever were afraid of.
Carey, you've already told us what was scariest for you, the refrigerator scene, but go ahead and talk about that now.
Sure. I mean, I remember the leeches the most because, well, I remember the dead animals because I don't do dead animals well. But I remember the leeches so much because I just remember, like, because this kid's obviously, fucking nuts. Like, one of the things comes out and he lands on his arm, and I remember him just sitting there staring at it like, oh, I wonder what this is. And then it fills up with so much of its blood that it, like, pops. And I just remember reading that while sitting, like I said, by myself in a hospital room with a patient, just being like, yeah, I'm going to put this down for a little while. I can't do that.
So there's two parts of this section where he's getting destroyed by flying leeches that really get me every time. One is that one latches onto his eyeball, and then King says it deflates the eyeball. The other is that one of them goes into his mouth, and Patrick Hochstetter's last cognizant thought is, I cannot let this thing explode in my mouth. And then it does.
Yeah, I remember the mouth one a lot. That was the part where I was like, gonna close this.
The fact that we have not gotten a proper adaptation of this scene still upsets me.
I understand it, and honestly, I don't think we ever will.
I'm telling you, Junji Ito, he'll draw it.
Sure, but I don't think it's ever going to happen in a movie or on television.
Yeah, no.
We'll get an anime.
So, and that's just ignoring the fact that prior to all this, we find out that Patrick Hochstetter is abducting local pets, locking them in a refrigerator in the dump, and seeing how long they survive.
For me, the scariest part was him killing his little brother.
No, me too.
Yeah.
Like that was the scariest part for me on the first read. But all of this is scary too. It's like, I think for me, like that whole chapter is probably the scariest chapter in the book, because you get him murdering his brother, and then you get him murdering all these pets.
Do either of you guys watch like CSI or Criminal Minds or any of those types of shows?
Never.
Yeah.
Okay, there's an episode, and I can't remember which one of these dumb shows it comes from, but a little boy is murdered. Like, the boy's like 3 or 5 years old, right? And it turns out his older brother did it because his younger brother told everyone he wet the bed. And like,
is it the one where he put him in like a dryer or some shit?
I don't remember. I remember him beating him to death with a bat, and then hiding the bloody shirt like near like where homeless people camp out, so that they thought maybe a homeless guy did it. And one of the cops knew that the older brother did it, and
I think we're talking about the same thing. And then he put him in a dryer.
Yeah, and another cop like spent the whole episode trying to disprove it, only to figure out, yeah, the older brother, like this like 8-year-old kid beat his younger brother to death with a bat. And this chapter reminds me of that episode because that episode freaks me out.
And like I said earlier, this is the kind of part where you're like, okay, like, because
this is something that could happen.
At this point, you have like suspension of disbelief with the adults a little bit because, like, oh well, if your kid comes up to you and tells you there's like weird shit happening, like a giant bird chasing them down the street, you're like, okay, like, maybe we shouldn't be having the sugar pops for breakfast anymore. But like, this is like real stuff. That's crazy. That's like,
and
him putting the animals in the refrigerator had nothing to do with any supernatural whatever. It was just, this kid is fucked up.
It's what gets him off. We didn't even... Oh, we'll probably talk about that in Kiss Me, Fat Boy.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll get there.
So, the first time I went through this book, it was my first Stephen King book. It was also, like, really, like, my first horror novel, like, true horror novel. So, a lot of the stuff I just was not prepared for. I had grown up watching movies based on his books, but I didn't realize how much of a true deviant he was until I really read one of his books.
Stephen King is a sex pervert. I don't care what anyone says. He's a sex pervert.
Yeah. So, the first time, I was actually listening to the audiobook while I was at work. At the time, I was working at a comic book store. So I remember, like, you know, I was doing something really happy. Like, for me, like, sorting the new comics when they come in and filling subscriptions and putting all the new comics out on the wall. That was something that made me, like, super happy, and it was super zen for me. But I was listening to this story about this fucked up kid who suffocated his infant brother in his crib, and it just, like, ruined my fucking day.
Yeah.
Kind of puts a damper on things, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I just, like, almost didn't continue with the book.
It's one of the reasons why I can't finish Cujo. Is just too much of that book is real, and this is a very... Is it, like, something that you would expect, like, you don't hear about every day? It's an outlier, yes, but it's something you could hear about and go, yeah, that's something that happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know?
100%, especially, like, working, like, with children in mental health, I can 100%, like, see...
I can't violate HIPAA, but we've had children patients that have done shit just as bad, if not worse, than this kid.
Oh, absolutely.
Don't want to know.
Yeah, I won't tell you.
You don't. You really don't.
And then people wonder why I have such a fucked up sense of humor. Daniel, you've always had that.
I feel like...
Yeah, you had that long before ever working where you work.
I feel like some of that might just be Daniel being Daniel.
Yeah.
If anything, you've toned down a little bit.
Yeah. I got a little dose of reality.
I feel like in college we and you said and did a little bit more outrageous things, but I guess we were still developing some parts of our brains at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It explains, it doesn't excuse.
Okay, so there are some other scary things that happen in this section. I before we throw to you, Daniel, I want to shout out a couple things that happen in the Bullseye chapter. Mm-hmm. One thing, just quickly, that freaked me out was, I think it's Richie that opens the cabinet that's full of rats, mm-hmm. and he describes that all of the rats have their tails tangled together in one ball of tangled tails. Now, I'm not a person that's, like, afraid of, like, rats and spiders and that kind of stuff, but the way he describes it, he says, that's the most rats I've ever seen. I think that's the most rats that anyone has ever seen.
Yeah.
It's fucking freaky.
Yeah, that got you.
And then...
Amalgamation.
And then this one's even better. When they're going through the house, on Neibolt Street, Ben sees a pinup of this girl, of this woman with a wrinkled face. And then as he's describing it in the frame narrative when they're in the library, Bev realizes she saw it too, and that woman was Mrs. Kirsch.
Yeah. That was actually super freaky, because it sort of implies like there's... I don't know if time loop is the right word, but there's something definitely weird with time when it comes to this book.
Yeah, it's not a timey-wimey book, but
there's something especially contorted with the way that Pennywise can manipulate reality.
that's something we'll probably talk more about in the next episode.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is a good example of that. Daniel, what are some other stuff that stuck out to you from part 4 that was scary? Or what is something that wasn't scary and why?
I didn't think the Wolfman was scary.
I think he's like almost supposed to be sillier, because he has like the Letterman jacket. What was the like stitching on the jacket that was really silly?
Oh, something Dairy High.
Dairy High, like Scare Team, or
it was something weird. It like the werewolf was supposed to be scary because it's the realest werewolf that ever was.
Mm-hmm.
But in my head, I guess I just can't picture it. Maybe it's just because we just got done like with Dog Soldiers not too long ago.
Yeah.
But I'm like, I would drop kick a werewolf if I saw one. Like I could see myself trying to fight a werewolf.
Yeah.
Something I can't see myself trying to fight is the reality that a young boy would smother his brother to death. Like how do you deal with that?
Werewolves are probably like one of my top 3 movie monsters of all time.
Yeah, I love them.
But I don't find them particularly scary.
Yeah, like
I also think that might just be like a thing of the times too, because like
it was a lot newer back then.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they were talked about like the movie, right?
Yeah.
They talked about I can't remember the movie that they were talking about.
I Was a Teenage Werewolf.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm sure back in that day that was absolutely terrifying, like the movie makeup and all that. Especially for a kid, I'm sure that was absolutely terrifying. But now we're just like, that's some really bad special effects. Like CGI, got that shit, get it out of here. Like I think it's just another thing that's a difference in modern times versus back then.
Henry being so willing to fuck with Mike also kind of freaks me out.
Yeah, how he's just ready to shove fireworks down his pants and destroy his genitals.
Poison his dog for his father's approval.
Ugh.
And that was another thing with the whole poisoning the dog thing. With Patrick, he's batshit, like, that's a sign of him being crazy, is him torturing the animals. But with Henry, it wasn't about the animal, it was about Mike.
He did it to hurt Mike.
Yeah.
Yeah, he didn't care about the dog. He just wanted to fuck that little boy's brain up.
Exactly. I thought this kind of ties back into the Adrian Mellon chapter where he gets jumped, but it was scary just how like Eddie is jumped by five bigger kids, and he's completely powerless,
and literally no one can help him.
Yeah, and like I said earlier, the adult jumps in, and Henry just shoves the adult, and everybody is stunned because Henry is a kid and this guy's an adult. But Henry's done. He's past the point of no return. He's out of his fucking gourd, and he's ready for violence.
One of my worst fears is getting jumped by multiple people. A fear that has been brought on by American History X.
Yeah.
So you were going to say one of my biggest fears is getting jumped by children, and I was like, Daniel.
I've been jumped by children. At work.
The curb stomp scene. That's like probably in like my top 5 like scariest movie moments.
Oh, like, for me it's the prison scene.
Oh yeah, that one's bad too. Like that whole movie. that movie is rough. That's rough.
That movie has like 5 of my top 10 fears.
Yeah, and that movie came out without getting political. that movie came out before, nationalism and a revival of fascism in America was something that people were talking about topically.
Yeah.
But that's a whole nother discussion. Anything else scary that we want to talk about, or something that wasn't scary, and maybe why didn't it work?
I didn't really find the coming of Pennywise scary. I don't know if it was written to be.
For me, that was more of like where we're trying to find out more about the lore of Pennywise.
Yeah.
And it's talking about like his true form.
I guess it's kind of freaky that they literally could be pulled away from reality to see it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely the scariest part of that, is that, like you said, they went back and they weren't there. Like, they actually were there.
I cannot stop eating these peanuts.
I know, those are freaking delicious.
We should have a pickle night.
We should. Dill pickle chips, dill pickle peanuts.
Dill pickles.
Oh my
dill
God.
Pickles.
Both your tongues are gonna, like, just shrivel up and fall out of your mouths.
And then we'll get a bunch of mint chocolate chip ice cream.
Yum.
Yeah, that sounds perfect. And beer.
And beer.
And King of the Hill. Okay, moving on.
Kiss me, fat boy.
Kiss Me, Fat Boy. All right, we've been dancing around it a lot. So, the middle section of the Patrick Hockstetter chapter is Beverly is at the dump practicing shooting the slingshot. She accidentally comes across the bullies. They're lighting each other's farts. They're having a gay old time.
She notices one of them hit puberty.
She notices Victor Chris has pubes and his penis is bigger than everybody else's. But so there is a little bit about this budding sexualism where Beverly is seeing a naked boy for the first time, and King talks about the feelings that she's having, because it's a little awkward there because
it's a little awkward. I think it's more awkward for me because I wasn't a teenage girl.
Yeah, and neither was Stephen King.
Awkward.
Yeah. I think he writes it kind of well, and I'm going to tell you why. This is what popped in my head as I was reading. Have you guys seen Turning Red?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, that scene where she's drawing pictures under her bed.
Yes.
When she goes, Bill has a thing like that. That's immediately what popped in my head, was that scene from Turning Red.
I have told my daughter that if I ever find drawings of her and a boy, I'm doing exactly what the mom in Turning Red did. No, I would never do that. That's terrible. Carey, before we get into Henry and Patrick, how well do you remember this? Can you tell us any thoughts you have about how King writes Beverly and the feelings and the thoughts she's thinking as she's observing these naked boys and what eventually happens?
Tell us about you as a teenage girl, Carey.
I mean, my first thought would have been gross, but in a way, I think he captures the awkwardness of it kind of well, because I mean, you feel the secondhand awkwardness just reading the book, and that's definitely something that you would have felt in the moment if you were there. It's just, ew, this is weird and awkward, and I don't like having these weird thoughts about knowing that that's what that looks like. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think he even, I might be remembering wrong, but I believe he wrote that she had to stifle laughing.
Yeah, he did say that.
Okay.
If I could ask Stephen King a question, here's what I would lead with. I was like, okay, so Mr. King, you're not always known as writing women from a very sensitive place. However, I would say that one of your best examples of writing a really fleshed out female character is Charlie McGee from Firestarter. And from my research, it seems like you wrote that character particularly well because your daughter Naomi was the same age as the character when you were writing that book, and you based Charlie and Andy's relationship on your own relationship with your daughter.
Mm-hmm.
So a few years later, you write It, and there's the scene where Beverly Marsh observes some naked boys in a dump, and eventually one boy jerking off another boy, and she has some very confused feelings about it. And what I want to know is, did you ask your daughter, hey Naomi, if you were in this situation,
how would you feel?
How would you feel?
I think what happened was he looked under her bed and found her drawings.
And she was drawing like pre-adolescent boys jerking each other off.
And that's the secret origin of Stephen King's It. That's how he wrote the whole book.
Okay. So, getting to the meat and potatoes, Victor and Belch leave, because like you mentioned earlier, Belch has a job.
Mm-hmm.
Henry and Patrick stay, and they're still lighting each other's farts, and then Patrick says, you want me to show you something, Henry? And he's like, what? And then Patrick just starts jerking him off.
And Henry lets him.
Till the point comes where Patrick says one of my favorite lines in the book, do you want me to put it in my mouth, Henry?
I love that scene because Henry was okay with it up until that. He's like, I ain't let you put it in my mouth. I ain't about that gay shit. Just jerk me off like a good American boy.
Isn't there a part earlier in the book where he says something like, nobody says I suck the root, or something like that? Maybe I'm getting it confused with something else.
I think so. I think you're right.
Okay, so the first time I read this, I was already freaked out because of the Patrick suffocating his little brother thing.
Mm-hmm.
Then this scene shook me up a lot too. And as I've read this a couple times and I try to reflect on it, I tried to take a step back and say, why did this scene freak me out? Because I have no issue with, I'm an ally. I'm totally cool with any sexuality as long as my rules, as long as it's two consenting adults, whatever they want to do is cool. But for some reason, two adolescent boys, give in a hand job and a dump,
mm-hmm.
it fucked me up. Is it because, and I'm trying to be as candid as I can here, is it because I secretly have homophobic tendencies, or is it because of the situation, or is it because of the characters?
Do you want my honest opinion?
I want your honest opinion.
I think it's the way Stephen King writes it. He doesn't write it to be about two secretly gay lovers discovering their sexuality. He writes it as one slightly confused boy being jerked off by a sociopath, and the scene reflects that. It's written to be very not good.
Perverse?
It's written to be perverse. Beverly's watching it and is confused and is having all these weird thoughts about it herself. It's not written as a open situation. It is written to lead you in that uncomfortable way.
Carey, what are your thoughts?
It kind of did drive me up the wall a little bit to be like, oh, of course, like, the crazy kid is going to use, like, I'm trying to think of a way to say this. It's not going to sound
racist, homophobic.
Daniel-ish.
I'm trying not to sound like you.
I thought what I said was very woke.
See, then you say something like that. It did drive me up the wall a little bit that it was like the crazy kid is using like homosexuality as a bad thing, kind of. You know what I mean? But that might just be like hashtag social justice warrior of me. But
I would say that, considering that there was a gay couple that was murdered and that was portrayed as a not good at the beginning of the book.
Yeah, and I don't know how true this is, but I read a review once that Adrian Mellon and his boyfriend from the beginning of the book was actually very forward and progressive of King to have a gay couple portrayed in such a positive way, even though bad things happen to them. they themselves are good people, and that this article I read said it was not common of the time. I don't really have like any way of like.
Yeah, I don't have any context.
Yeah, I don't have a way to verify that, but.
Yeah, and
yeah, I know what you mean, and I think it's the fact that, like, the age thing that bothers me. That's what made me uncomfortable. Is like
it's not like two 16-year-olds jerking each other off. They're like, what, 13?
Yeah, and like, if you told me like, so like I said, I'm okay with whatever between consenting adults. They're not adults, but they are both kids. Mm-hmm. If you told me that two boys had a sleepover and they played with each other under the covers, I said, oh, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, it's just John Kent being John Kent.
Yeah, that's exactly. But I would say there's nothing wrong about that in that context, but the context that happens here, I can't completely explain to me why it sets me on edge.
Well, you got like a sociopathic kid kind of leading Henry, who's sort of dumb, in a direction.
It's not 100% like consensual on both sides.
Henry almost seems confused as by what's happening in the situation until he brings up putting it in his mouth, and then it clicks for him. Oh, this is gay shit.
I almost wish like this wouldn't have worked, but I almost wish Patrick would have been like, no, it's only gay for me to do it. It's not gay for you to receive it, Henry.
Oh, so the Spartan rules.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, that's fine. That's fair.
No, I'm glad that wasn't in there, but it would have been amusing. Okay. Any final thoughts on this or anything else in this section, sex-wise?
Not in this section. They do talk about how everyone is sort of embarrassed whenever Beverly's shirt gets blown off.
Yeah, at the end of the Bullseye, chapter 18, she loses her shirt, and they see just a bit of one of her breasts, and she's asking, can somebody give me their shirt, please? And they're all just, like, floored.
I can't help it that I'm a girl.
Yeah, that was a little weird, but, I mean, if I was an 11-year-old boy, I probably would be, like, stunned, too.
Yeah, I remember my first titty.
I was not 11.
Not when you saw it?
Oh, saw it?
Mm-hmm. Because that's what floored him.
I was, well, in person?
Yeah.
No, I was not 11.
Oh.
I was much, much older.
Oh.
Do you have thoughts on Beverly's breasts?
That was I do not. I mean, I guess it's just because it's like a, coming of age story, but that was one of the things that kind of gave me the squicks about this book, was like how much sexual stuff was in it.
That happens to kids.
Yeah.
This isn't even the first time that they've brought up Beverly's panties.
Yeah, and when a lot of the sexual stuff happens, Bev is usually present if it's not focused around her. Like, she's the one who describes her parents having sex.
Mm-hmm. The sex act.
The sex act.
Doesn't sound painful. Sounds like Mom likes it.
She's the only one whose underwear is brought up again and again.
Mm-hmm.
I had another good example, and it just, like, completely flew out of my head. Okay, she's the one who observes the sex act among the bullies. It could have been it could have been Stan observing them, but no, it's Beverly.
The power of Christ compels you! The power of Christ compels you!
Let's move on to our last big topic before we stop winding down. The power of Christ compels you. We actually haven't been hitting our religion section on most of these episodes, but I kind of found a way to worm it into this. Daniel, so I want to ask you, tell me a little bit about the origin of Pennywise, and I want to ask, does this fit into any of the framework of any major religion? And if it doesn't, why?
Well, you got him falling from the sky, which, I mean, I don't know a lot about a bunch of different religions. Or if they believe that aliens fell from the sky, maybe Scientology. But it's very, You could call it Paradise Lost-esque. Satan falling star, that sort of nonsense. I think that might be a little bit of a stretch.
To say that he was a fallen angel cast out of heaven?
Yeah, well, to say Pennywise was.
Yeah, no, that's what I meant.
Yeah, the imagery's sort of similar.
Yeah.
When you think of it. But I honestly don't think that was the, allegory's the wrong word. Yeah, I don't think that was the intent that King was trying to make. He does play around a lot with faith in this chapter.
And that was the other thing I wanted to touch on, is faith is kind of, the theme of faith or belief is kind of portrayed in this section using the slingshot and the slugs as a device. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on that? And Carey, jump in when he starts rambling.
I mean, then she'll jump in as soon as I start talking. I mean, they flat out say it. It's like the security blanket sort of effect. Hiding your head under the blanket from the monsters. It works because kids believe it works. And they even sort of call attention to it, and then they start to manipulate it, like with the kill 'em thing. Like, Beverly knows she doesn't have another shot, but if she believes she does hard enough, it's going to make the monster go away.
And then, to build on that, like, the silver slugs are only really effective in the first place because they believe they will be.
Yeah.
Or at least that's my interpretation of it. Maybe his weakness is silver.
I 100% think it's because they believe that monsters are weak to silver, which is why he shows up looking like a werewolf. Because, I mean, we can't get it. I'm not going to get into any more of Pennywise later, but there's zero reason to think that silver is an actual weakness outside of them believing it's an actual weakness.
Carey, what are your thoughts?
It's almost like I didn't think of it quite as a religion thing, but it might be that it's just not the first thing that popped into my head. It's like faith and trust in pixie dust, kind of like the Peter Pan thing of, oh, if I give you this magic powder and you really, really believe.
We need Tinkerbell to fly again, everybody. All you kids in the audience, we need Tinkerbell to fly. Say you believe.
It's literally like that thing, though, because that's like, you know, watching that movie now as an adult, you're like, Jesus, God, that's stupid. But, like, there are children out there who, like, super, like, close their eyes real tight and just wanted to bring Tinkerbell back to life so bad that they thought that it helped. But it's the whole going back to the whole overarching theme of, would any of this have worked if they weren't kids to believe in it? Kind of a faith more than religion.
I believe the silver is a callback to the shekels that was paid to Judas Iscariot for Jesus.
Could be. Give me definitive proof that that's not right. Okay, we're going to bring this back up in the final episode when we can finally go full spoiler and talk about everything. So we'll come back to this. All right, so talking about some King Easter eggs. There's not a ton in this section. So Patrick Hockstetter is a King Easter egg. Where does this name also pop up?
Firestarter.
Firestarter. Dr. Patrick Hockstetter. Not my favorite character in Firestarter, but he's in there.
I like the garbage disposal.
That was Dr. Bronson Pinchot.
Oh, which one was Hockstetter?
Hockstetter, so Pinchot was Andy's doctor.
Oh, okay.
And Hockstetter was Charlie's doctor.
Oh, okay, so who's the competent one?
Dr. Wanless. The one who said kill Charlie.
Yeah, that was the competent one.
Yeah. And then, as we've been going through this, I've been flagging all the turtle references. We had two in part 4 that I caught. One was it swam, and it looked like something else, a turtle. And then the other one was Eddie makes a references to turtle wraparound sunglasses.
Yeah.
Yeah, which was a little strange. Okay, so let's jump into Kings and Koontz's. This is where our props and our slaps, we talk about our favorite and our least favorite part of this section.
Oh my God, are you Stephen King? No, I'm Dean Koontz. Oh.
Daniel, what is your king, and also, what is your Koontz?
My king is the entire Eddie chapter. I think it's the best written chapter in this part. I love it because it's something that doesn't focus on the horror, it focuses on character building, and I think it does a really good job. And my Koontz is the interlude, because I could not remember it.
Fair. For me, for the first time, my king and my Koontz are the same thing.
Oh.
And I can explain it in 2 words. Patrick Hockstetter.
Okay, there you go.
Because in a way, he's like one of the most memorable characters, and it's one of the most memorable chapters in the entire book. But I also almost stopped reading multiple times throughout that chapter, and it's so fucked up. I don't even know if the book would be worse if you just lost some of that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, Patrick is both. How about you, Carey?
Yeah, definitely my favorite part was the part that freaked me out the most, which was the refrigerator and everything revolving around just that crazy ass kid, and just seeing that, oh, it's not just, it's almost the feel of, like I said earlier, Henry is crazy, kind of, not only because he's being influenced by Pennywise, but I feel like Pennywise is making it worse. But that kid's just like, he's just nuts. That kid's he needs to be institutionalized somewhere.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, he's dead now, so it doesn't matter. But, yeah, and I would say the kind of letdown part was the part that I still, after talking about it, do not remember.
Yeah, the fourth interlude.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not like it was bad. I think it just got lost in a sea of good.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
And it's kind of like how we were talking about in part 3 with the walking tours, how you, me, and Matt all just had trouble remembering Eddie's.
Yeah.
And not because it was bad, it's just because it had trouble sticking out among all the other ones.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so moving on to homework. Daniel and I had some homework today. So my question was, what form of Pennywise that would appear to me would you most like to fight, or most be willing to fight on my behalf?
Okay, I got a good answer for this one, and it's the spooky kids from the Sinister movie,
Uh-huh.
whooshing out at you, because I'd be willing to drop kick them for you.
Really, the spooky kids from the Sinister movie, did that get you, Ryan?
You know that story I told you where he screamed, "I don't like this movie" in the middle of the theater, and everyone laughed? It was because of the spooky kids whooshing out from the darkness.
I don't want to talk about this.
That would be the form I'd be most willing to fight.
And I hope that Pennywise appears to you as your ex-wife, because I've wanted to drop kick her in the face for years.
There you go.
I will help you with that.
I support that. I support this decision.
And if anybody in law enforcement is listening to this, that is a hypothetical. It's not a threat on anybody.
Yeah, no, we're gonna kick Pennywise that just happens to look like my ex-wife.
Exactly. Okay, and then
It's all 100% kick her ass. I don't care.
and then Carey, for you, I had written down like who is your favorite loser and who did you identify most with. You kind of talked a little bit about who you identified with or didn't earlier, but who's your favorite loser?
Let me think about that for a hot second. He's not my favorite loser, but I like the fact that Stan, when he first got presented with the, this thing is real and we need to kill it, because he was so logical, he's just like, no, it's not possible. This isn't real. We're all just going the same shade of crazy at the same exact time. But
that was Daniel's king when we covered that section.
Yeah.
Yeah. If I had to pick one, I think it would be, I like Bev. I like Bev a lot.
She is stellar.
She would be my favorite. And also, Ryan, if it makes you feel any better, if Pennywise was real, he would 100% look like Howard the Duck to me, because I'm terrified of Howard the Duck. So, it could be worse.
I was afraid of people in animal suits when I was a kid. A story my mom likes to tell is when I was in preschool, a dentist came and they brought somebody in a beaver suit, and I kicked the person in the groin.
So you would not do good at the furry convention.
No. Well, I mean, I'm not going to go around kicking people in the groin.
Do you remember whenever we went to that thing in Pittsburgh and the furry convention was going on at the same time?
It was in Boston.
Was it in Boston?
Yeah, because we went to the pub, and the waitress asked us if we were here for the furry convention.
Oh, I was talking about when we went to the Magic tournament.
Oh,
because AntherCon was going on at the same time.
Yeah, that too.
They were like right across.
You're talking about Boston because I remember the Boston story.
I've told her so many of our stories.
We have too many.
I've heard so many things.
Yeah, most of them bad, I'm sure. Okay, so our question.
Most of them involve Daniel, so.
Yeah, all of them. Our question for the listeners this week, please reach out to us on our socials. Let us know what you think. Who's crazier? Henry? Patrick? Butch? Or do you have a hot take? Do you think someone else is the craziest?
Stan?
Well, I think you can make an argument for Stan. But reach out to us. Let us know who you think. And just so you know, coming up on the Horror of Babylon, next week we were supposed to do an episode reviewing Pennywise, the story of it, which is the making of documentary on the 1990 miniseries. Unfortunately, we don't have access to that, so instead Daniel and I are doing a episode reviewing Dog Soldiers because it just had its 20th anniversary.
It's so good.
Yes. And then the following week, which will be Sunday, June 26th, will be our final episode on the It novel. We'll be covering Part 5, the last interlude, and the epilogue. We'll finally be wrapping that up and having a full spoiler conversation on this novel. And then first Sunday in July, we are covering the It miniseries. Sunday, July 10th, we are covering a manga, Rumiko Takahashi's Mermaid Saga. And then the July 17th, we're covering the first It movie. July 24th, we are covering the novella by J. Sheridan LaFano, Carmilla, which is a great vampire story. And the final Sunday in July, we are covering It Chapter 2, which will wrap up our It coverage, and we will finally be done with this story. I remember when we finally finished The Stand, we were both so ready
to be done with The Stand.
I don't feel like it's going to be the same with It. I've had a much better experience covering this.
I think that's attributed to two things. One, I just like the book It better.
Yes.
And two, we have been breaking up the It discussion.
Yeah, we did all the Firestarter stuff.
Yeah.
We have our episode on Dog Soldiers. We're going to talk about Mermaid Saga. We're going to talk about Carmilla. And Carey, you want to be back for some of these, right?
Sure.
Yes.
I just read Carmilla. Carmilla was actually the last book I read.
I've read it too. I love it. I think it's a great book. Daniel, you've never read it, right?
I read it in between the chapters.
Okay, great. So we'll get you on for that. But I think that does it for tonight. I want to say thank you, Carey, for coming on with us. We really enjoyed having you on the show.
Always. I miss you.
And thank you as always, Daniel, for joining me for this.
Of course.
And thank you to the listeners. Thank you very much, and stay scary.
Stay scary, everybody.
And now for the obligatory socials. Like, share and subscribe. Blah blah blah. Follow Daniel at DStarSick on Twitter. Follow Ryan at DarthDamio on Twitter. Find the podcast on Twitter at HorrorPod69. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Goodreads. Become part of the community by joining the Facebook group or asking for our Discord link. Email us at thehorrorofbabylonpodcast@gmail.com. Support the show at patreon.com/thehorrorofbabylon. You can listen to the show on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Audible, Amazon Music, Stitcher, and Podcast Addict. I need a drink.